All right, I think the bulk of us have joined, so I'd like to welcome everyone that just showed up. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to go ahead and get started. 5 ways to transform your training program with technology. So we've got some exciting content, some expert insights to share with you today. And before we dive in, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Just want to make sure everyone gets the most out of our time today. So if you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please use the GoToWebinar chat panel and we will do our best to address them. We'll have a Q&A at the end, so if you have specific questions that you'd like answered, please make sure to put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. And as usual with our webinars, you'll receive a copy of the presentation recording and the slide deck in an email tomorrow, follow-up email, so please be on the lookout for that. And if you happen to think of any questions afterwards, after the webinar wraps, that weren't answered during today's session, please go ahead and reach out via email and a member of our team will get back to you with an answer for that. So a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about how modernizing your training program can both protect your agency and your responders and make you more efficient. We're going to talk about 5 specific ways you can transform your training program with technology, and we're going to hear examples of those and get to some product specifics. And then at the end, we're going to wrap with an interactive Q&A where we can answer any questions you've had throughout. My name's William. I'm a content marketing specialist here at NeoGov, and now I'm going to turn it over to the real stars of our webinar today, our product experts, our thought leadership experts, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and take it away.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Robin Gifford. I am one of the customer success managers here with PowerDMS. I came aboard in 2021 after retiring from public service with over 25 years. And so part of my experience included being a 911 operator and a police officer. And I'm so thrilled to be here with the company that serves the people who serve the people.
And my name is Bobby Gotch, and I'm just as bald as I was in that picture, but a little bit more facial hair. Like Robin, I am a customer success manager, but also a subject matter expert or SME for the PowerFTO solution. I held a similar role at Agency 360 that was acquired by NeoGov and has been rebranded as PowerFTO. So like Robin, I'm excited to talk about it and share some more details and specifics about the platform. So like Robin, I don't like talking about myself very much. So let's dive into what William was talking about there. And I think about modernizing your training program is like changing your culture and CYA documentation. Both can happen, and it doesn't have to be one or the other. Changing the culture is a priority, and what I hear from agencies day in and day out. There was a great webinar recently put on by some of our colleagues, Kevin and Robert, where they touch on this topic and the hiring process in greater detail. So I won't dive into that too much, but public safety agencies have had to get creative with hiring, and it takes all the stars to align to get qualified candidates. So doing everything we can to make sure that new trainees brought in the right way is a high priority. Exposing them to how your agency does things and that you want them to succeed, which drives kind of the second point, the importance of documentation. More than ever, the documentation is crucial to an agency's success, not only for changing the culture, but to fall back on for when a tough decision needs to be made, but also defend the decisions that was made. And that's kind of the stuff that I plan to highlight today when we talk about using PowerFTO. And Robin, I know you went through helping build out a program in the past. What were some of the struggles and things you guys went through?
So back when I was a 911 operator, we didn't really have a training program. This was a sheriff's department, very small rural county, so there wasn't a program. And I identified the need for a program. So what I started out with was just building a simple checklist. But the thing about the checklist is you don't know if it's effective or not. All you know is that you covered a topic and you checked it off. And at the end, you sign off saying, yep, she covered all these things with me. And so that's all we had. Um, and we needed a way to not only protect the agency, but the trainee, the trainers, making sure everybody's doing a good job, that you're providing adequate training, and that you've got that documentation to back it up. And then I think back when I was an officer, and I know there's people on this call that are going to identify, I had a big 3-ring binder, about 3 inches thick, had a lot of paper in it. And it's a lot of flipping back and forth, trying to find the place where you're trying to check off on your list of something you completed, and trying to figure out, like, what's the next thing we need to be working on. And then if there's a change needed, having worked on the administrative side, if you need to change something in one of those books, you've got people in the program, well, that's not an easy lift, because then you got to make all the copies and punch the holes and get them out to everybody, make sure the trainers understand what they need. And then that trainer and trainee are or the trainees having to carry that binder around, and it's just burdensome all around. So I think the thing that I thought of when I came here and we got FTO was, what a great idea an electronic system would have been to keep up with all of that for us. And then to make sure that the standards that we have set are there for success and that we can actually meet them. So that's kind of my perspective and my experience on that.
And I think you're spot on, and that's kind of the general consensus, for most that I speak with. But we have a poll question that we put together. What is the biggest training related challenge you face today? And so if attendees can just take a moment to answer that. I have a feeling I know where this one might go. But Robin, what are your thoughts on while we still have it open there?
Well, I have a good idea of where I think it'll be. I don't want to cause people to sway one way or the other,
Yeah.
but I've got mine written down here, so I think it's I think I know what it's going to be. We'll see.
Yeah. I'll just give that another second.
Okay. I'm curious what the answers.
Oh, there we go.
Wow. Okay, so it's interesting. I really thought communication was the one that I had picked that was going to be the difficult one. So, and then my next one was going to be that time-consuming documentation. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, I like that bottom one. That one I thought
Yeah.
was going to fly below the radar, and it did, and it took off. So
Very good. All right, next slide. So we want to work into kind of this next area is how you can save time and resources. And so I'm going to go to the next slide here and talk about some of the inefficiencies that you have. We talked a little bit, I just kind of mentioned that, but looking at your record keeping and your documentation. So if you think about it, your trainers are kind of that first level. So they get overburdened. They've got to do a DOR every day. For those of you who don't know, that's a daily observation report. So maybe they're late, maybe they're incomplete, or maybe they're just, too many and they're trying to, keep up. And it seems like you begin to focus on the paper versus the trainee. I've got to get this paper in versus are you doing a good job training that person? And then you have the administrative needs that compete with that because they are trying to locate paper records if you're on a paper system. They want to see how those trainees are doing, but there's not really a good way to do that in a paper system. You've got the cost of your books and your binders, printing things. You might miss something. It's easy. If you do big check boxes and initialing, maybe you miss one of those lines and you don't actually get it checked off because you just overlooked it. The other thing is a big overtime cost. So your trainers and trainees are working together. They're busy throughout the day. They didn't have time to kind of work as they went. And then at the end of the day, they're just starting that reporting process. And so that leads to overtime costs at the end of the night, and then them trying to remember what all occurred throughout the day. And so Bobby's going to talk a little bit on the next slide about how we can deal with some of those inefficiencies that you see.
No, for sure. And at first, I should preface at the beginning, I'm getting over a cold, so I have a really dry throat. So that's why I'm drinking a lot. So I apologize that that's distracting for folks. But I love this topic, right? Because it could honestly probably take up an entire webinar itself. But from the smallest to largest agencies we work with, this is a huge struggle that they deal with when they come on board. For a lot of the things Robin mentioned, paperwork is lost. It's not filled out properly. Not knowing if a trainee has been exposed to, this or that. Do I have good trainers? Are my supervisors doing what they're supposed to be doing? And this is more just a general question, but how many of you have employees waiting in line to become a trainer? This position of mentorship has all of its own challenges, and Robin kind of touched on it. But even just the documentation that needs to be filled out can be extremely overwhelming. You hear the saying all the time, but it was, my calling to be a first responder. And it's an extra calling to want to be a trainer. How do we make things easier, faster, and more efficient for employees? Not just trainee and trainer, but everyone involved in the training process. The power behind FTO, let's see what I did there, is that piles and piles of forms, 3-ring binders, checklists, call logs, the entire signature process, it can take all of that and put it all together in a convenient location for visibility at any point. Forms will no longer need to wait until the end of the shift to be completed. PowerFTO allows for them to be filled out in real time throughout the shift, which only increases accuracy of documentation. It's usually some of the first feedback that we get when a customer comes on board and works through their first trainee. Previously, if command staff came to you and asked how a recruit was doing, you probably had your initial feelings of, they're doing well, or maybe they need some more time. But if they wanted to know specifics, it may have taken hours, days, or weeks to put together that data for them by tracking down forms and, having meetings, and now it can be done in seconds. I'm not a sales guy. I'm on the support and advocate side of things, but being on this side, it's music to my ears because it's such a huge piece of the pie. Even if you're a coordinator that is on top of your program at all times, how amazing would it be with the click of a mouse to know what a trainee has or hasn't been exposed to? The platform was designed by an officer with the end users in mind, and I think it shows. And one more quick example, and I think we even have a screenshot that highlights this a little bit, is the trainee handoff, right? They just completed a phase and now they need to work with a new trainer. What does that process look like? Every agency is a little different, but I'm guessing the trainer takes a peek at that big binder or checklist that we keep talking about, maybe even has a sit-down meeting with the previous trainer, digging through a bunch of DORs, talking about positives and negatives, and then they go their separate ways. Or how about even when a trainer calls in sick and the trainee needs to work with kind of that stand-in trainer for that shift? You want it to be productive and not just a throwaway observation day. How does that trainer know what the trainee needs to be exposed to or has been exposed to? With PowerFTO and data at their disposal when they need it, it's never been easier. And Robin mentioned overtime. And, Gillette PD recently provided a stat to us that PowerFTO saved them 1,600 hours of overtime a year. Let that sink in for just a second. 1,600 hours of overtime a year. Robin, what could your previous agency do with 1,600 hours of overtime saved?
Yeah, they could definitely afford to purchase PowerFTO with that, I'm pretty sure. That would make a good transition there. Yeah, that is really awesome to hear. And so moving forward, we're going to talk about the visibility in your program and how you can kind of see things as you go when you're working in an electronic system like FTO. So I can tell you that in the system I had at the last agency, there was a lot of things happening with trainees that administration wasn't aware of. So I'm curious if there's any leaders on this call. I'd be curious how many of them have received a not responding to training or a request for termination, and they really had no idea anything was going on. You know, it wasn't until it got to that point that it came to them. So that's one of the beauties of FTO, is because you don't have to deal with that because you can see inside the system. And then, you know, a lot of systems, especially paper-based, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your trainers? Are the trainers doing a good job? Are they modeling the policies and the procedures that you want them to model? Are they showing them the right way? Are they showing them the wrong way? You know, how do you know that? That is definitely an important area, because you don't want, if you have a bad Apple trainer, you don't want them to continue being a trainer, right? You need to identify that, help them correct the behavior, or maybe you need to bring them off of that training program. So that's important to identify. And then you want those trainers, do they have, the trainees, do they have the visibility to see kind of what's going on in their program? Like, you know, what did they do in the past? What did they do well? Where are those areas of improvement? You know, can they see that easily? And so Bobby's going to show you a little bit about, in the transparency and visibility, how this program can help you with that.
Yeah, it's CYA, right? I speak with so many agencies that have evolved and adapted their training programs or run a hybrid model, you know, that stood the test of time. But you can have the best outline training program there is, but if you don't have instant visibility and accountability into what's happening, we're kind of putting ourselves in a tight spot. And maybe you've been lucky up to this point, but I think most have encountered the situation that Robin kind of mentioned, where it was just too late to save a trainee because it just took way too much time for a form or word of mouth or just some piece of information to get to the right person, that it was just too late. And with how difficult it is to bring candidates on, we just can't afford to do it that way. And PowerFTO can alert specific users when certain criteria is met or a trainee is graded a certain score in a performance area, keeping those that need to be in the know in real time. And we think about FTO programs and CTO and FTEP programs, we typically think about the trainee, right? How important it is and how much it will help us to kind of standardize and streamline our program. But some of the more powerful things about PowerFTO, and the thing that agencies figure out, is it has the ability to pull in data on the trainers and even the program as a whole. You can run reports with the click of a mouse to know how trainers are scoring and evaluating the trainees. Because who wants to flip through a 1,000 DORs and figure that out? Which I believe, William, I think we have a screenshot for this. You know, are they grading too harsh, too light? Are they always giving that score that doesn't require a comment because, you know, they want to fly below the radar and just do their job? Like Robin mentioned, it can help pull out who those trainers are. You know, many agencies will have trainee self-evals, trainer and program critiques. But why? Is it just because it's a form we've always filled out? Is it, you know, for accreditation or just another box we're checking? What's done with it other than it gets filed away and collects dust? We talked a little bit earlier about culture changes and how we all want to do that. One of the ways in PowerFTO is using this data to do just that. The agencies that are on the cutting edge are in evolving their program are using this data to help them make their decisions on the future of their agency by looking at everything involved in the program and as a whole, and not just, are my recruits being successful or not? And Robin, it looks like, you know, subjectivity, great topic, is the next one. What was it like for your agency?
So absolutely going into that subjectivity. And what's really cool is this is also what that highest one we got on the poll today was how do you maintain those standards agency wide? So we don't want to be just subjective and give our opinions. We want to make sure it's a valid opinion based on how that trainee is doing versus the standard we have set for them. So here's the thing that I say: how many, as a trainee, because I know I experienced it, said, "Well, this FTO I was with wanted it this way, and this FTO here wanted it a different way," and you lead to a trainee being confused on, okay, now what do I do if I'm out on my own? Do I do it this way or that way? So setting those standards and linking your policies in there, whatever you need to do to make sure that that stays that way. And then you also hear trainers, I've heard it, many agencies say, oh, just forget everything you were taught in the academy. I'm going to teach you how to do this the right way, and maybe they are, but instead of just showing how they do things, you want them to meet that standard, right? So I talked a little bit about timing the other day, or excuse me, in an earlier slide. So at the end of the day, you've got a trainee and a trainer, they're ready to go home. And we talked about having to fill that DOR out at the end of the day. So if you're doing that at the end of the day, how reflective of your entire day is that? And so there are things that, kind of get muddied in the waters. Is there a bad training moment at the end of the day that overshadows the rest of the day that was really good? Did the trainee really get a fair score to ensure that you're capturing the entire day versus just that one bad call? And is the trainer able to remember all of the things that happened throughout the day? Because if they're overlooking all that good, they're not getting a complete record. And so we want to make sure that that's not what's happening. We don't want that recency bias, if you will. And so Bobby's got some information on how to avoid that.
No, I appreciate the segue, Robin, because I think there is a couple things at play here when it comes to subjectivity. Right, so I'll touch on a few of them that you brought up, and recency bias. Right, it's human nature, and one of my favorite topics, because I personally struggle with it on a daily basis when I think about my family and my wife and my kids, and that could be its own webinar. But I'll stay on topic here. When a trainer is evaluating their trainee, they may be taking actual physical notes, but for most it's more of a mental note, because many times another call just came in, or you have to shift your attention to something else. When push comes to shove after a 10-hour, 12-hour, or even longer shift, what are you going to remember? For most, we remember the things that stick out, good or bad, or the most recent evaluation, that recency bias, like Robin mentioned. And not every department does things the same way, meaning some calculate averages, some are more of a, how they've been doing recently, and others purely score based on whatever the lowest score was for the day. So if a trainee struggled on the very first call, but was perfect the rest of the shift, that's the score they would receive per their policy. And I'm not saying one of those is the best way to evaluate or one's better than the other, but again, the beautiful thing about PowerFTO is the ability to grade a trainee's performance on every activity that they complete. So in the moment, give the trainee a score on what you just saw, which then at the end of the shift, when an overall score is needed, the trainer would have the full picture to make the final decision, which I believe we have a screenshot for this as well, for what I mean there. We do the same thing with reporting too. We can accommodate that kind of that full picture or snapshots on trainees' recent performance. One other quick note about the subjectivity on an observation is the ability to have the software suggest a rating based on the scores a trainer's given throughout the day. This can be huge from a trainer that might have that recency bias or is just trying to remember an entire shift. What do I give? You think about the standard evaluation guidelines, and I won't dive into great detail about what those are, but they are there to help guide that trainer in the right direction on how to score. And they're right in the platform at their fingertips. And you talk about that trainee at the beginning too, Robin, of them, that visibility. that trainee being able to have and understand what the SEGs are and having it there at their disposal can be huge, right? And I think about a conversation that's stuck with me over the years that I had with a dispatcher a few years back, and she said, I didn't get into this line of work because I'm an English major, right? So in the platform, an agency can fight subjectivity and even grammar mistakes and rejections with something we call common responses. And these are canned language, that an agency can come up with for the narrative comment section, but a trainer can just quickly select and then move on to the next one. The other aspect of subjectivity, like Robin kind of talked about even previously, was not responding to training. And it's such an interesting thing because you read about NRT in post-approved training models, and many times it flat out says that NRT can be very subjective. In simplicity, NRT is meant to be used when a trainee isn't grasping a concept. When should that be checked? How do you cure subjectivity? Because NRT can mean something completely different depending on who you ask. And that's a debate all on its own, but it shouldn't just be on a trainer's whims. Have we done enough, and have we shown we've done enough? But an agency can use data in PowerFTO to drive visibility into a potential problem before it actually becomes a problem. Using criteria, they can come up with an alert for visibility when it allows, and then it allows, for users and staff to create corrective activities and document the necessary steps were taken to ultimately make the tough decision one way or the other. And Robin, I know most of what we talked about so far is thinking about bringing in those brand new people. But what were things like for current employee that maybe wanted to move into a new role at your agency?
Right. So I think ensuring role readiness is important because here's the thing. Right now in the system, you can do all your onboarding, and that's how most people think of this type of program. What's really cool about FTO and that I like is if you don't have a formalized training program for transfers, for promotions, maybe bringing somebody back to work after an extended leave, whether that's FMLA, a military leave, whatever, you can actually build a program for that. It's just kind of endless on what you can do for onboarding, transfers, promotions, and following that employee through their entire career. The other thing I was thinking of is your policies being linked to specific types of activities and roles. And so Bobby will talk a little bit about that in a minute, but do you also have a way to ensure that your DORs are moving through the process? So they're going from each role in the system to the next role, and it's easy to tell if there's somebody that's kind of blocking everything from getting to that next step. You'll be able to see that in the system, which I really like that. But that role readiness, to me, that is really cool to be able to follow them through the entire system. Being able to do evaluations on people, being able to, and so it can do those annual evaluations, and it can also do the what's the word I'm looking for here, Bobby? The
probationary.
That probationary. I was like,
Yeah.
It wasn't coming to me. So having the ability to do that as they go through the system is really important. So I know that you're going to talk a little bit about templates on this next slide. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, and those are excellent points, right? There's so much more involved in it than just the onboarding documentation. There's that once they hit that probationary period, hey, they're in solo capacity, you can continue that documentation, and then even that annual evaluations. But in public safety, we typically think about a field training program for a brand new person, whether it's police officer, telecommunicator, EMS, corrections. This is typically what we think of. And expanding on where Robin was going there is in PowerFTO, it can be used for so much more and is arguably the most valuable component to the platform. It can be used for anyone being placed into a new role. Like Robin mentioned, she brought up promotions, right, for new supervisors. What does that process look like for you today? right? Feel free, if you want, you can throw some in the chat, but I have this conversation on a daily basis with our existing agencies. And the typical answer I hear from the smallest to the largest is that there isn't a documented process in place. Typically, the employee would ride or sit with a current supervisor, for a varying length of time and get that exposure to their new responsibilities, right? Show them the ropes. Why is this? And I don't mean that negatively at all, because I understand where the thought process is coming from, because it's basically what we do with our field training program for a new hire. But why is documentation different for a brand new person compared to an existing employee? From a liability standpoint, we've come up with these checklists and evaluation categories and those standard SEGs, your standard evaluation guidelines. But for an existing employee, we don't do that. How do we ensure that they all get trained in the same way and exposed to the same things? Where's the CYA documentation that, 6 months down the road, an incident happens, the new supervisor says, well, I was never told about that, and, in my couple shifts of training to be a supervisor. How was I not supposed to how to handle that? Right? You think about new trainers. Same thing. Some states and agencies, they require trainers to become certified, whereas others, this process is not as formal. I mentioned at the beginning of how many have a line of employees that want to be a trainer at your agency. And if you do that, it's amazing. And just another way that PowerFTO platform can be used, to set them up for success in their new role and document that process. Breaking out call taking and dispatch, EMTs and paramedics, investigations, specialty units, laterals, you brought up that, Robin, are just a few ways that agencies can use the platform and heavily use it today. And one of my favorites, and Robin touched it, is, and it's gained a lot of steam over the years, is a return to duty program. Because almost every facet of public safety encounters the situation where someone goes on leave for whatever amount of time. They probably haven't forgotten how to do the job. They probably know it as well. But having a program built out to review certain high-risk aspects of the job is an excellent way to bring them back into the fold, but also a great CYA moment. I also hear, well, we don't have a process in place, so I'm not sure where to start, or that's a different division, and they would need their own users and checklists and workflows. And the great news is we've worked with agencies over the years to build out templates that will get you in a great spot to build off of for those roles. Plus, user permission is program specific, and checklists and alerts are all role specific. And Robin, do you think bringing in, that entire agency into the use of the platform, do you think that's, and being on the advocate side of things, do you think that's valuable for an agency?
I absolutely think that it's valuable. And one of the things that we'll cover in this next section is talking about how you support everybody through that process using the software. So if you don't have data and you're not pulling out data, whatever program you're running or however you're running it, how do you know if it's good? How do you know if it needs to be improved? How do you know? So I would ask those on the call, can you analyze your records easily to make sure you're doing well and you know those areas for improvement? Do you know at a glance if you need to focus on supporting your trainers, your trainees, or the overall program and any changes or amendments? Have you ever repeated something? You're in that paper binder and you realize, oh my gosh, we had too many of this, or we repeated this, it was doubled on 2 different pages, just because you didn't have a simple way to make those changes to those books because they're so big, time consuming. Somebody's got to manage all of those records and they need to manage the Word documents that create them. And so do you get stuck in that rut of this is how we've always done it and we're just not going to take the time to update it? We don't have time to do that. And then a big key that I think of too, having worked on the administrative side, are subpoenas and Freedom of Information Act requests. How do you respond to those? Are you taking that book down, throwing it through the copier machine and scanning or copying that and printing it out for somebody? is that an easy process? Because if you're using FTO, the cool thing is all of that can be automated. And I know Bobby's going to talk a little bit more about those reporting capabilities that the system has that are so important. Next slide.
It's another one that I think it's a great one that kind of ties it all together. And those were excellent points, Robin. And a big part of all of this is getting a standardized training program, right? I hear this a lot from new customers on why did they purchase PowerFTO? You know, we wanted to standardize and modernize our training program. How do we ensure that each trainee gets exposed to the same types of things? This is what we're all trying to accomplish with those checklists and giant binders, right? Time and time again, you hear how a trainee should have wrapped up their program already, but we realize they never were exposed to X, or they only did it once, but we need them to do more than that. So everyone's scrambling and going through this process to get them exposure. Not to mention, are we exposing them to the right things at the right time? In PowerFTO, an agency can take a little bit more control on when things get done, or easily translate how they've built it already. Because we don't want to find out this trainee's in phase 4, and we didn't even talk about use of force or active shooter policy in the field yet. You know, speaking of policies, we think about how important policies and SOPs are, which I won't get into much, but we think about these topics which are imperative to agency liability, right? How do we know our trainee's been exposed to a certain policy? Have they read that policy? Those may be covered in pre-academy or classroom settings, but many times those come up during field training, right? Many even have it as a checklist item in their books. Or you might have a checklist item like handcuffing or software training. But your trainer will get to them, they see that I need to explain, demonstrate, and observe it. All the while during the training of this topic, basically reviewing policies that could be tied to it. And a quick note to any DMS policy customers on the call today: if you add PowerFTO, you can link those two together, which is really slick. Like I'm pretty sure we have a screenshot on that as well. Or any current FTO customers looking to streamline policy management and make things easier on your trainers, maybe you should look at the Power Policy solution as well. And that's my biggest plug for sales, being the non-sales guy. Where I was going with that is that you can have some more control on when things get done and how it should get done. And last point for me, in being able to support your users and your program as a whole, is being able to run comparisons in reporting, which I think the next slide even touches on that as well. Looking at one trainer to another to understand, are they being exposed to the same things or not? How is this person doing compared to this person? Same thing with trainers, with side-by-side comparisons. These are all amazing from a CYA standpoint for training exposure and documentation, but from a trainer and admin standpoint, it's huge. It's game-changing. And standardizing this can help them get ready for the job, regardless of what role you're documenting in a solo capacity using the FTO platform. And hopefully that sheds a little more light on the power of PowerFTO.
All right. Thank you both, Robin and Bobby, for all of your expert insight today. That was wonderful. I know we covered a lot of ground, a lot to digest. So I want to thank you both for sharing your insights, your product knowledge, and all those effective ways technology can transform training programs and improve agencies and the efficiency of responders. So thank you both. So we're going to dive into a Q&A now. We've had some activity here in the chat. So I think the first one, I'll direct this to you, Bobby, is how many onboarding programs can we have within PowerFTO? And could I create a training program for every role within my organization?
Absolutely, and that's kind of one of the nice things about when Agency 360, previous role, was acquired by NeoGov, is that's been opened up for agencies, and it's on an unlimited package to where you can do it for every single role. Some agencies are starting to kind of still in the transition process of that, so you may still be on one of those lower tiers, but eventually, it will be opened up to be able to expand on those unlimited and do it for every single role. And Robin even touched on annual evaluations and the probationary period. That same thing, it opens up for everybody for unlimited roles.
Wonderful, thank you. Robin, I'll direct the next one to you. How do I turn on the Power Policy integration in my PowerFTO site? I think Bobby might have touched on this briefly, but if you could expand, that would be great.
Sure, I'm gonna put a link here in the chat if you can send that out to everybody. So basically what you're gonna go do is, so if you have FTO, go into your site settings, then to your add-ons, and you'll enable that Power DMS. There's be a button to click it and make it active. And then once you see that active, when you go into any of the places like your skills and things where you have a description field, in that description field, there'll be a Power Policy button that you can hit, and then it'll give you the option to, once it's linked up, for that file picker to pick what policy you want to add into that area.
That's so awesome someone asked about that, because it's such a powerful piece of being, if you have both products and connecting them together to where your trainer can easily get to that policy in just a click, it's game changing.
And I think we'll take a third and final question, if that's okay for you both. Bobby, I'm going to direct this one your way just to alternate again. How easy is it to pull records and reports for subpoenas?
Oh, I love this question, and it's surprisingly easy. And I say that because, again, the platform was built by a former officer with the officer in public safety user in mind. In a simple, couple clicks, you can pull an entire record. It exports it into a zip file with PDFs. You can then share, you can print. Or maybe you're still one of those agencies that has to keep a paper copy in a folder somewhere. Extremely easy, and almost like a quick plug for our knowledge base, because it's chock full of how-to videos and help docs to walk agencies through things just like this and answer most of those, how do I questions. You can usually find it right in the knowledge base.
Great, thank you. Thank you to everyone for submitting questions. Thank you, Robin and Bobby, for expanding on those. All right, everyone. So if you'd like to learn more about PowerFTO, the benefits you can bring your agency, I know Bobby shared some screenshots there, but if you'd like to see those features he mentioned in action, please get in touch with our team and for a free demo using the link here that will be included with the deck, or just visit our website and a member of our team will be in touch with you. I want to take a moment to thank our speakers for their time, their knowledge today. You're both wonderful, did a great job covering so much ground that I think provided a lot of value. And I want to thank every one of our audience members today for taking the time to join us. Hopefully you learned something, and we look forward to welcoming you all again in the future.